She looked at me and said, "Don't try to deny it. I see it in your eyes." And just like that, everything changed. The first time she looked at me, it felt like the world had paused for just a fraction of a second. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, just that quiet, imperceptible shift that makes you realize someone has noticed you differently. I was sitting in the corner of the library, my laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to focus on notes that had suddenly lost all meaning. And then there she was. She wasn't loud or flashy. She moved with a calm confidence, the kind of presence that fills a room without demanding it. A 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair caught the light of the afternoon sun through the tall windows. Her skin was lightly tanned, her soft laugh lines and subtle freckles framing eyes that seemed to hold a quiet understanding of the world. She wore a cream blouse tucked neatly into tailored trousers, simple, elegant, effortless. I noticed the way she scanned the shelves, tilting her head ever so slightly, lips curving into a faint smile when she found the book she was looking for. And then our eyes met. It wasn't a flirtatious glance or a polite acknowledgement. It was something heavier, more deliberate. She looked at me like she already knew something I hadn't even admitted to myself. And in that moment, I felt exposed and strangely understood all at once. My pulse quickened, though my body remained rooted to the chair, caught between wanting to look away and wanting to hold her gaze. The library was quiet, the soft rustle of pages and distant footsteps framing the tension between us. I found myself imagining what it would be like to speak to her, just to hear her voice, to see if the warmth in her eyes carried into her words. She walked past my table slowly, enough for her sleeve to brush lightly against my arm. The touch was fleeting, yet electric, a whisper of connection that left me aware of her presence long after she had gone. I tried to focus on my notes, on the words on the screen, but the image of her lingered, persistent. There was something in the curve of her smile, the steady confidence in her stance, and the subtle curiosity in her gaze that made the room feel smaller, warmer, more alive. I realized that the simplest glance could carry weight far beyond what I thought possible. When she disappeared down the aisle, I exhaled as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. And yet, there was no sense of disappointment, only anticipation, because something had shifted, something unspoken, invisible, but undeniable. She had seen me, and I had seen her, and I knew, even then, that this was the start of something that neither of us would be able to forget. By the time the library emptied and the late afternoon sun softened into a warm golden glow, she had returned to the same corner, this time with a small notebook in hand. I wasn't sure if she had noticed me lingering nearby, but I found myself drawn to her presence like a moth to a soft light. Every movement she made seemed deliberate yet effortless. The way she tucked a strand of long black hair behind her ear, the tilt of her head as she scribbled a note, the gentle furrow of her brow as she read. She was a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, graceful and confident, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, dark brown eyes that seemed to weigh more than the words she spoke. And I, 24, young and observant, felt the pull of something I couldn't yet define. I found myself moving closer, pretending to adjust my chair as I passed her table. And that's when she looked up, deliberately, knowingly, and smiled. Not the polite smile of a stranger, but one that carried warmth, curiosity, and just a hint of amusement, like she could see right through my carefully measured composure. "Are you always this focused?" she asked, her voice low but clear, carrying the subtle authority of someone used to being heard. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "I try." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that's not loud but lingers, filling the quiet space with a gentle warmth. She leaned slightly forward, resting her elbow on the table, her hand brushing near mine as she turned a page in her notebook. That brush, barely there, unintentional yet intentional, sent a quiet shiver through me. It was a touch that said more than words could, leaving me acutely aware of her nearness and the subtle grace in every movement she made. Our conversation began with small, harmless topics. Books, the shifting colors of the afternoon sunlight, the quiet comfort of familiar routines. But slowly it deepened. She spoke of experiences that revealed wisdom without arrogance, the joys of solitude, the lessons learned in moments of uncertainty, the quiet victories that often go unnoticed. And I found myself opening up too, sharing thoughts I rarely voiced aloud. With every word, every pause, every glance, I felt the invisible threads of connection tighten, weaving something neither of us had named. At one point, our hands shifted slightly on the table, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating through the space between us. I caught her eye, and in that glance was the unspoken acknowledgement of something profound, understanding, curiosity, and perhaps a shared recognition of desire restrained by respect. When the afternoon faded into evening, I left with the memory of her voice, her smile, the subtle weight of her presence beside me. Our words had lingered, like soft echoes in an empty room, carrying the promise of more, a promise neither of us could yet articulate, but both of us understood. Even as I walked away, I felt the quiet certainty that this was no ordinary encounter. Something had begun, delicate, fragile, and entirely irresistible. A few days had passed since that afternoon in the library, but she had not left my mind. I wandered into the small café near campus on a rainy afternoon, the scent of coffee and baked bread mingling with the fresh, earthy aroma of rain on pavement. The warm light through the large windows made the wooden tables gleam softly, and steam rose lazily from every cup. I didn't expect to see her, and yet, when I looked up, there she was, sitting by the window, her long black hair slightly damp from the drizzle, a soft scarf wrapped around her neck. She was a 40-year-old American Latina woman, lightly tanned, graceful, confident, with subtle laugh lines framing her dark brown eyes. Even in casual attire, a fitted jacket over a cream sweater and dark trousers, she radiated a quiet, magnetic presence. She glanced up and saw me. For a moment, the world outside the cafe, the hum of the rain, the chatter of patrons, all seemed to fade. That same knowing smile curved her lips, as if she had anticipated my arrival and had already decided this encounter would happen. My chest tightened with a mixture of anticipation and awe, and I realized I had been holding my breath without even noticing. I made my way over, and she gestured to the empty chair across from her. The movement was casual, yet deliberate, inviting and unspoken. As I sat, I noticed the subtle warmth radiating from her hand as it rested near mine on the table. I could feel the quiet steadiness of her presence, grounding, electric, and oddly intimate. We ordered coffees, and the barista's steam and clinking cups filled the background, blending with the gentle murmur of conversation, creating a cocoon where only the two of us existed. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, like we had known each other longer than a few brief encounters. She spoke of books she had read, observations from her work, and the small pleasures she savored on rainy afternoons. There was a rhythm to her speech that made me lean in slightly, attuned to every inflection, every laugh, every pause. She laughed softly at something I said, and her hand shifted just enough that our fingers brushed briefly. The touch was fleeting, mere seconds, but it left a lingering warmth that traveled from my fingertips to my chest, an invisible tether connecting us. I found myself studying her, noticing the subtle details, the curve of her smile, the light catching in her eyes, the way her hair fell over her shoulder. It wasn't just attraction, it was admiration, curiosity, and something deeper, a sense of being seen. When our eyes met again, she didn't look away. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly, and in that gesture was silent acknowledgement. She had noticed me, entirely, and perhaps had been waiting to see if I would notice her too. As the rain softened outside and the cafe continued its quiet rhythm, I realized this encounter had shifted something fundamental. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a beginning, delicate, tentative, and charged with possibilities that neither of us had the courage to name aloud, yet both of us felt in every glance, every brush of hands, every lingering pause. It was one of those evenings when the world felt paused, suspended between the retreat of day and the hush of night. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the glow of the streetlights. I found her waiting at the corner, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, soft laugh lines framing her dark brown eyes, subtle freckles scattered across her cheeks. She wore a tailored coat, her scarf tucked neatly, hands in her pockets, exuding a calm confidence that contrasted with the quiet tension I felt in my chest. When our eyes met, she offered that small, knowing smile, the one that always seemed to suggest she understood more than she let on. I stepped closer, and together we began walking, the rhythm of our footsteps unhurried, deliberate, almost conversational in their silence. The air smelled of wet pavement and the faint sweetness of blooming street-side flowers, carrying a freshness that made every breath feel vivid. We didn't talk at first. Words seemed unnecessary, overshadowed by the quiet intimacy of simply being together. Every so often, our shoulders brushed accidentally, and yet it didn't feel accidental. There was a gravity to her presence, a subtle warmth that lingered whenever we were close. I felt it deep in my chest, steadying and electrifying all at once. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Her voice was low, almost hesitant, but threaded with a quiet honesty. I glanced at her, catching the soft curve of her lips, the way her eyes reflected the glint of the streetlights. "Sometimes," I admitted, "like you're doing everything right, but it still doesn't feel like yours." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the sidewalk, reflecting on her own thoughts. "Exactly," she said. "I've spent so long being the person everyone expects me to be that I forget what it's like to just be seen." Her words struck me, carrying a weight I didn't anticipate. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. Her fingers hesitated, brushing briefly against mine before intertwining gently. The warmth of her palm was grounding, soothing, yet filled with a quiet electricity. I felt her thumb trace slow circles along my skin, a gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. We continued walking, side by side, our hands loosely clasped, feeling the tension between us deepen yet remain unspoken. Every glance, every pause, every soft exhale conveyed the emotional intimacy that words alone could never capture. Her presence made the world feel smaller, quieter, and entirely ours. At one point, she glanced up at me, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Be careful," she murmured, teasing and sincere all at once. "You don't know what you're starting." I wanted to tell her that maybe I did, that maybe I already knew. But instead, I let my hand squeeze hers lightly, a silent acknowledgement of everything unspoken. And as we walked on through the glistening streets, I realized that sometimes the most meaningful moments aren't the ones that are said aloud. They're the ones felt in the brush of a hand, the quiet steadiness of a heartbeat, and the shared understanding between two people who can't yet name what has begun. It happened one evening, quiet and unplanned, in the warmth of her living room. I had come to return a book, nothing more, but the moment I stepped inside, the air seemed heavier, charged with something neither of us had named. She was there, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair falling softly over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, and dark brown eyes that carried both curiosity and quiet confidence. She wore a cozy cream sweater and dark jeans, the kind of outfit that seemed effortless yet intentional, perfectly reflecting her calm, graceful presence. The room smelled faintly of jasmine and the pages of old books, a comforting, almost intoxicating mix. The soft glow of a lamp in the corner cast golden highlights across her hair and the furniture, making the room feel intimate without needing grand gestures. I set the book on a coffee table, and she looked at me, that same knowing look, the one that made my chest tighten without warning. We sat down on the couch, not far from each other, the distance deliberate yet charged. I noticed the subtle curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened as they met mine, and the quiet steadiness in her posture. We spoke about mundane things first, the weather, work, small observations, but even in the triviality, there was something profound. Every pause, every glance, every tilt of her head carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. At one point, a strand of her hair slipped across her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out to tuck it behind her ear. My fingers brushed her skin, and for a heartbeat, the room shrank until it felt like it existed solely for the two of us. Her eyes caught mine, dark brown depths filled with understanding and a gentle warning. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice soft but deliberate. The words were light, almost playful, yet they carried the gravity of someone who understood the pace at which hearts should move. I leaned back slightly, the ache of wanting restrained by respect. Her gaze lingered on me, steady and warm, conveying more than words could: acknowledgement, curiosity, and the promise of something waiting to unfold. For a moment, I simply watched her. The way the lamp light caught the subtle freckles on her cheek, the curve of her lips as she held back a laugh, the calm rhythm of her breathing. Every detail reinforced what I had been feeling for weeks. This connection was rare, delicate, and entirely alive. We didn't need to speak after that. Silence wrapped around us like a soft blanket, heavy with unspoken words and tender restraint. The room hummed with warmth, and every glance, every small movement, seemed amplified by the closeness we allowed ourselves without crossing invisible boundaries. When I finally left, the echo of her gaze stayed with me. It wasn't rejection. It was the quiet power of someone who knew that some things were worth waiting for, worth savoring, and worth experiencing fully when the moment was right. And walking home, I realized that restraint could be more intense than any declaration, because in that careful pause, the anticipation grew, and with it, the certainty that what was unfolding between us was far more meaningful than either of us could have imagined. The days stretched into weeks. I hadn't expected the silence to feel so loud. Each morning, I woke to the absence of her presence, the echo of her laughter and the soft cadence of her voice lingering in my mind like a song I couldn't quite finish. She was a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, dark brown eyes that seemed to hold everything she didn't say. And I, 24, young, impulsive, yet deeply aware, was left navigating the ache of noticing just how much she had begun to matter. I tried to occupy myself. Long walks through the city, books piled high on my desk, coffee in cafes I had never noticed before. Yet everywhere I went, there were traces of her. A scent in the air that reminded me of her shampoo, a soft curve of sunlight catching a passing stranger's hair, a book I might have borrowed if she were beside me. Every small thing became a reminder of the moments we had shared, the ones that had begun to feel impossibly intimate in hindsight. Nights are worst. In the quiet, my mind replayed the brush of her hand, the warmth of her glance, the way her eyes seemed to read every hesitation I tried to hide. I realized, with a mixture of frustration and awe, that the connection we had forged wasn't something that could be paused by distance. It persisted, stubborn and insistent, pressing against the walls I had built around my own heart. Then, one afternoon, a single message appeared on my phone. Simple, direct. "You still think too much." It was her. That small text carried her presence across the miles between us. I stared at it for a long moment, a smile tugging at my lips despite myself. I typed back cautiously, "Maybe you should remind me how to stop." And immediately, I felt a spark, a thread connecting us again, delicate but undeniable. The next day, I found myself back at the same cafe where we had lingered for hours, talking and laughing and brushing against each other in ways that had been charged with unspoken meaning. I didn't know if she would come, but I felt that same quiet certainty I had felt the first time our paths had crossed. And then she appeared. She stepped in from the bright morning light, her coat slightly damp from a passing drizzle, long black hair catching the sunlight. She was elegant, graceful, subtly radiant. A 40-year-old American Latino woman, soft laugh lines visible as she smiled, a presence that seemed to slow the world around her. Her eyes met mine instantly, steady and knowing, like she had been expecting me all along. We sat together again, hands brushing across the table as if by accident, and the quiet tension between us seemed to hum in the air. Words were not needed. Every glance, every pause, every soft smile carried 1,000 things left unsaid. Acknowledgement, longing, hope. The distance had made it all more potent, more necessary, and I realized that absence hadn't diminished the connection between us. It had sharpened it. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without the weight of uncertainty pressing on me. The thread between us was alive, taut, and ready to pull us closer once again. The evening had the kind of calm that made everything feel suspended, a pause between the fading warmth of day and the quiet of night. I walked along the riverbank, the golden light of sunset reflecting off the water, glinting across the gentle ripples. The air smelled faintly of the river, fresh, cool, grounding, and the city hummed softly in the distance. And there she was. She was waiting near the railing, her long black hair catching the last rays of the sun, a 40-year-old African-American woman with lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, and dark brown eyes that seemed to hold everything we hadn't said. She wore a flowing cream coat that moved gently in the breeze, elegant and effortless, exuding a confidence and calm that always drew me in. The curve of her smile was familiar, comforting, and entirely disarming all at once. When our eyes met, the tension I had carried for weeks melted into something steadier, warmer. There was no need for words, not yet. Every step I took toward her felt deliberate, careful, aware of the invisible thread that had bound us through time, distance, and silence. And when I reached her, our shoulders brushed lightly, the contact sending a quiet, grounding warmth through me. I said softly, though it felt like I was saying far more than a greeting. She tilted her head slightly, a knowing look in her eyes. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. Her voice was calm, confident, yet threaded with subtle affection, as though she had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. We began walking together along the river, side by side, letting the gentle rhythm of our steps and the quiet of the evening carry the weight of our thoughts. Every so often, our arms brushed, small sparks of connection that didn't need words. At one point, she reached out, placing her hand lightly on my chest. The warmth of her palm pressed against me gently, grounding me, and I felt the steady beat of her heartbeat through that soft, deliberate contact. Her eyes found mine, and for a long moment, nothing else existed. Not the water, not the city, not the fading light. There was only that gaze, unflinching, patient, certain. "I see it in your eyes," she said softly. I swallowed, feeling both relief and awe. Those words, so simple yet so profound, carried the truth of all our shared glances, silences, and touches. She had known all along, and now there was no longer any doubt, no hesitation, only the quiet, mutual acknowledgement of what had been growing between us. I reached for her hand, intertwining my fingers with hers, feeling the gentle pressure of her grip. Foreheads nearly touching, we stood there, breathing together, letting the golden light wash over us. The world continued around the river, but we existed in a bubble of calm certainty, intimacy, and quiet joy. No grand gestures were needed, no declarations, no rush, no pressure, just the warmth of hands, the steady rhythm of shared breath, and the undeniable connection that had carried us to this point. In her eyes, I saw everything I had been afraid to admit, and I finally understood. The answer had always been there, waiting for me to notice. And now it was ours.